the system. The suggestion that this is fraud suggests that these people were trying to vote when they
400 of them.
Yeah,
I think fraud.
Hold on. Let's be honest. I mean, sometimes
incorrectly.
Yo, Keith Boykin actually hits the nail on the head. For something to be fraud, there has to be intent. These folks were registering at the DMV, explicitly marked that they were non-citizens, and the broken computer system registered them anyway. They didn't lie, and they didn't try to break the law. Yet Scott Jennings
came to CNN this week with one word and absolutely no math to back it up. Widespread. A software glitch in New Jersey's motor vehicle system accidentally registered 6,600 non-citizens to vote. The Democratic governor found it, fixed it, fired the vendor responsible, held a press conference, told the public everything, exactly what accountability is supposed to look like. And Scott Jennings sat down across from Abby Phillip and called it widespread voter fraud. So Abby Phillip did something that should happen every single time someone makes that claim on national television. She asked him to define the word. What is your definition of widespread, Scott? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? What number makes something widespread to you? His answer was more than 100. More than 100. In a state with millions of registered voters. That is his definition of widespread. And honey, the look on Abby Phillip's face when he said it was worth every second of this segment. Hit that like button, subscribe to Kelly Takeover, and let's do the math together. Let's go.
The Democratic governor of New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, revealing that a software glitch had added over 6,000 non-citizens to the state's voter rolls.
In June of 2023, nearly 3 years before I became governor, a serious software error in New Jersey's motor vehicle system led to the improper voter registration of what we believe to be roughly 6,600 people in our state. In the case of this error, some individuals indicated that they weren't citizens and weren't eligible to vote, but the software registered them anyway.
The governor said that about 400 of those people cast ballots, but there's no evidence at this time that any elections were swayed. She made the surprise disclosure just days after President Trump's address to the nation, where he claimed that hundreds of thousands of non-citizens are on the rolls across the country. Sherrill promised accountability and said that the vendor responsible for the system is being replaced. She also took a swipe at the president.
As the Trump administration tries to weaponize elections for political gain, I am ensuring that we protect our elections. Let me be clear. Donald Trump has zero credibility on the issue of election integrity.
The White House obviously seized on the news to help push Trump's voter ID bill, writing, quote, Democrat glitch registers thousands of non-citizens to vote, another reason to pass the Save America Act. This is obviously not a great situation. She acknowledged that. But it also doesn't demonstrate that there's widespread voter fraud in New Jersey or anywhere.
In New Jersey? 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's okay. To me, is pretty widespread voter fraud.
That's widespread?
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty bad if one person who's not a legal citizen in the United States.
The number of registered voters in the state?
New Jersey spends $60 billion over that overall on its budget. So I think if we're seeing...
Yeah, but I mean, you just said it's widespread. So where's the proof that it's widespread?
6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls.
That is 0.006% of registered voters in the state. Mikey Sherrill, she won her
I don't think it invalidates her election.
She won her election by 500,000 votes. There were 3.3 million ballots cast in that election. 400 ineligible voters. Let's say, because we don't even know, let's say they all voted for her, which maybe they did.
Yeah, it still wouldn't invalidate the election.
That would be about 1/100% of all the votes cast. Yeah. Widespread?
Yeah, 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's pretty bad. I think.
Hold on, widespread.
Yeah.
6,600 people who were inadvertently registered to vote. The vast majority of them never cast a ballot, and you're calling 400 maybe ballots cast by people who were registered as Republicans, as Democrats, as independents, as widespread in a state where there are 6.8 million registered voters?
Yeah, I'm with the governor of New Jersey on this. I think it's a pretty big problem.
That math doesn't math Jesse.
Well, I didn't say it invalidated Mikey Sherrill's election
I didn't
result.
say you said that, but I also dispute the idea that there's any proof that this is widespread.
I think there are thousands of non-citizens on the voter rolls in New Jersey, and I'm pretty concerned about that. I would call it a widespread problem. I think the bigger problem here is that...
What's your definition of widespread, by the way? Is it 1%? Is it 2%?
I don't know, more than 100? I think it's a big problem. What's yours?
What's your tolerance for this?
Hold on. This is not about tolerance. This is about, is it widespread or is it something that is relatively rare,
You're
Scott?
Pounding him over the word widespread. I just would ask you,
Scott,
what is your tolerance for any fraud at all?
Is it widespread?
Absolutely. Over 6,000 people.
What is your bar for widespread?
She said, my bar is I want no tolerance. Okay. I have zero tolerance.
So what is your tolerance for American citizens?
By the way, this isn't the only place this is happening.
What is your tolerance for American citizens whose valid voter registrations are invalidated by incorrect databases? What's your tolerance for that?
I don't have tolerance for any mistakes in the electoral system, including putting non-citizens on the rolls.
Okay, so then why are we not keeping the same energy for that as we are for this?
I do have energy. As you know, I've come out here and long argued that every time we don't clean up the voter rolls, that every time a non-citizen makes it onto the voter rolls, it invalidates some legal person's vote.
What about when an American is not allowed to vote when they are eligible to vote?
I don't have any tolerance for that either. An American citizen should be allowed to vote. But American citizens are invalidated.
Why are you okay then with the administration using a system that a federal judge recently found was actively removing U.S. citizens from the voter rolls based on inaccurate information? Why are you comfortable with that system being used to check the voter rolls?
This is a convenient deflection for you. This is the worst possible story that could happen for Democrats right now regarding the debate over the SAVE Act. 600 illegal aliens in New Jersey that you know about.
Can I tell you why I think this conversation is wrong? Because, first of all, this is not the worst possible conversation. This is actually a very good conversation for Democrats because Mikey Sherrill did exactly the right thing. She was transparent.
That's all I was saying.
Let me finish. She was transparent.
And it was good.
She was transparent. She was accountable. She immediately held the people accountable. She removed the software vendor, and she criticized the former governor, who was a Democrat, criticized the former governor for failing to address the problem. That's exactly what a responsible leader is supposed to do. Exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump did in his irresponsible speech last week. Exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump did when he lost the 2020 election and he told the people in Georgia he needs to find 11,780 votes, which, by the way, is voter fraud. This is not an issue about whether it's widespread or not. It's not, because it's really a question about, is it even fraud? This was not fraud. This was a mistake. People were given an option. Are you a U.S. citizen or not? They said no, but the computer system incorrectly registered them to vote. They didn't do anything of their own.
That's a fair point.
Fraud required them to do something on their own purposely to defraud the system.
The suggestion that this is fraud suggests that these people were trying to vote when they
400 of them.
Yeah, I think fraud.
Hold on, but let's be honest. I mean, sometimes there's been a lot of work done on situations like this, and going back, state by state, you can go state by state. There have been cases that have looked at it. They found, maybe a couple of dozen cases over the course of 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes what happens is that when state systems are incorrect, people receive information and they are confused. And they're not voting because
this is a great
they're
point.
not voting because they're trying to defraud the system. They might have cast a ballot because they just weren't aware that they were incorrectly put on the voter roll.
They weren't aware that they weren't a citizen of the United States?
No,
they said in this instance that they weren't citizens. They were still voting.
Is this accurately described as fraud when none of these people tried to register to vote?
Yes,
they cast ballots. 400 of them cast ballots. They had to actively go do that. I assume no one voted in their name. Maybe they did. I don't know. But they actively cast a ballot. Did they not? An illegal alien gets put on the rolls, however they got there, and cast a ballot.
I mean, but you acknowledge that some people might actually be confused, because this has come up in courts before, where some people who are ineligible to vote are not aware that they're ineligible to vote.
Guys, widespread waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't require malice. It can be a product of government incompetence. That's my point from earlier.
Okay, that's a fair. I mean,
you raised the issue.
That's why I said the state of New Jersey spends $60 billion annual. Surely there's a gazillion other examples.
I think it's a fair point that it can be due to the government just being dumb about some of these things or making mistakes. But again, I do think it's whether it is widespread or not matters. I do think that the numbers actually matter, because if the argument is that this is so widespread that you need to override the state's constitutional rights to run their elections, then you have to actually prove that that's
National
actually
voter ID is an 80% favorable issue.
The numbers don't prove this conversation of widespread. Language matters. Saying widespread and fraud, it matters when, to the point that you were making and that you were making, if folks were being honest about the fact that they are not citizens, and yet it was a mistake on behalf of the actual machines, and then the Democrat in office took accountability for it, this is actually modeling making sure that our elections are safe and fair.
Let us put the actual numbers on the table, because Scott Jennings was counting on nobody doing exactly that. New Jersey has approximately 6.5 million registered voters. The software glitch registered 6,600 non-citizens. That is 0.006% of the registered voter pool. Not 6%, not 0.6%. 0.006%. Of those 6,600 people who were incorrectly registered through no fault of their own, the system registered them after they indicated they were not citizens, meaning the error was entirely on the machine, not the person. Approximately 400 cast ballots. In the gubernatorial election, those 400 votes represented roughly 1/100th of 1% of all ballots cast. Mickey Sherrill won her election by 500,000 votes. Scott Jennings called that widespread. And when Abby Phillip pressed him to define the word, a completely reasonable request when someone uses it to describe a crisis requiring national legislation, he said more than 100. That is his threshold. More than 100 instances in a state of 9 million people constitutes a widespread crisis requiring an overhaul of federal election law. By that definition, every administrative error in every government database in America is a widespread crisis. By that definition, the DMV has been in a state of widespread catastrophe since it was invented. But here's the part that actually matters, and that Scott Jennings had absolutely no answer for when Abby Phillip put it directly to him. What is your tolerance for American citizens whose valid voter registrations are invalidated by incorrect databases? Silence. Deflection. A pivot back to non-citizens on the rolls. Because here is what the actual documented record shows. Aggressive voter roll purging. The exact kind of database cleanup that the SAVE Act and Republican election integrity efforts consistently push for, has repeatedly removed eligible American citizens from voter rolls based on inaccurate information. A federal judge found a system being used to check voter rolls was actively removing U.S. citizens based on bad data. Real American citizens. People with every legal right to vote. Removed. And Scott Jennings, who just told you his tolerance for election errors is zero, had nothing to say about that. Not zero tolerance. Not widespread. Not a single word of the same energy he brought to a software glitch that a Democratic governor already fixed. That asymmetry is the whole game, and Keith Boykin named it precisely. For something to be fraud, there has to be intent. These 6,600 people went to the DMV, checked the box saying they were not citizens, and a broken computer system registered them anyway. They did not lie. They did not try to circumvent the law. The state made an error, and then a Democratic governor did exactly what you want elected officials to do. Found it, fixed it, fired the responsible party, and told the public. That is not a scandal. That is governance working correctly. Compare that to what Donald Trump did when the 2020 election produced a result he did not like. He called the Georgia Secretary of State and asked him to find 11,780 votes. Those are his exact words on a recorded phone call. Find the votes. Not investigate potential irregularities. Not review the process. Find a specific number of votes that would flip the state in his favor. That is not a software glitch. That is not an administrative error. That is a sitting president of the United States explicitly asking a state official to manufacture an election outcome. And Scott Jennings, who comes to CNN every week to talk about election integrity, has never once brought that call the same energy he brought to a New Jersey DMV database error. Here is what this whole segment was actually about underneath the widespread debate and the tolerance questions and the moving goalposts. The SAVE Act requires documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. We covered this already on Kelly Takeover. 21.3 million eligible American voters cannot readily produce those documents. 11% of citizens of color versus 8% of white Americans. Federal funding withheld from states that do not comply. Criminal penalties for election officials who register someone without the right paperwork, even if that person is a citizen. That is the legislation Scott Jennings was on CNN to build a case for. And the case he brought was a software glitch that a Democratic governor already resolved before he sat down in that chair. He needed it to sound like a crisis, so he called it widespread. And when Abby Phillip asked him what that word meant, he said more than 100. The math was always going to end the argument. Abby Phillip just did it out loud. Drop a comment below. When Scott Jennings said his definition of widespread was more than 100, what was your reaction? Because I need to know if you were as done as I was in that moment. Subscribe to Kelly Takeover because we're doing the math every single time and we are not letting widespread pass without